Good evening to everyone. I am Leo Tadena. I am currently with the university's Center for Social Concern and Action. I was invited by Dr. Lawrence Bello uh, to speak on behalf of the class to talk about the university's social engagement framework, and of course, hopefully outline to us our understanding of how to go about an actual social engagement vis-a-vis our being Lasallians, for that matter. So before we proceed, I'd like to invite everyone to a prayer. And after our prayer, we will proceed with our discussion. And and hopefully after that discussion, we can have group activity where everyone can participate and hopefully interact on the basis of our learnings this afternoon or tonight. So let us now put ourselves in the loving presence of our Creator God. In the name of the Father, of the Son, of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our prayer is very timely as our world, our country is still beset with this ongoing pandemic. And I think everyone knows that we are already past 80,000 with around almost 53,000 as active cases. And so our prayer of healing should be our way of reaching out to everyone, reaching out that everyone heals in the process, given the many cases that we have right now. Let us offer our silence. Let us offer this silence to all our families, our neighbors, our friends, our kababayans, our fellow Filipinos, our fellow human beings in this world. Let us give them, let us give ourselves healing. Leave Jesus in our hearts forever. Okay, so given the start, which is basically our prayer, which is also a way of giving us certain context, the state of the nation, okay? And the state of the nation is basically that we are still struggling with many things on top of other things as well. I hope you were able to listen to the president speaking his mind as to the state of the nation. I think everyone will have their own thoughts on this and perhaps versions of the real state of the nation. Nonetheless, I'd like to proceed with our discussion for today as I am given a limited time. Our discussion for today is a very, very important discussion because it speaks of our nature as Lasallians. We can only truly say that we are Lasallians if we fully understand our ideals, our vision, mission, our guiding principles, the very framework that makes us Lasallian, the very DNA that makes us Lasallian. And so I like to proceed with a discussion today. And this discussion is all about social engagement in the university. I think that is a very interesting topic. And this should give us another perspective or another paradigm of how we see a university. Okay, for a university to be university, it has to be deeply anchored on three pillars. And these three pillars are obviously very much embedded in the Lasalle University. Of course, the first pillar has something to do with academics. Okay, students will never be here if in the first place they will not be learning. Okay, and De La Salle University has demonstrated that it is indeed into quality learning. Okay, and we can immediately attest that we are making ourselves on top of board exams, okay, and many other academic excellence related outputs. And then the second pillar has something to do with research. Okay, it is very clear in our vision mission that this university is not simply an academic university, but it is actually a research-oriented university, and that is why um, there is premium in doing research here in the university, because we cannot simply rely on learning, but that learning should translate into research. So it becomes something interactive, it becomes something not anymore simply cognitive, but also that you apply it with something more practical. The third pillar, of course, is social engagement. Okay, and this even makes our university very, very unique, because we cannot remain simply becoming board top-notchers. We cannot simply remain very good in research. They say, for what are all of this if it does not translate in helping our kababayans, if it does not translate in helping marginalized and vulnerable sectors. So if you have a research, for example, on flood mitigation, and this research translates in the getting rid of floods in Taft Avenue, or if your research is on traffic and that greatly helps the traffic volume of lessening the traffic volume of Taft Avenue, then your research is very, very effective and efficient, because it has translated into helping society. Now, let us proceed with the presentation. I'd like to share something here. A social engagement, the Lasallian mission. Before I proceed, I'd like to briefly share my very center or office which I belong to, which is named COSCA, for Center for Social Concern and Action, Center of Social Concern and Action, which was established sometime in the 80s by the late brother Andrew Gonzalez and the former DepEd Undersecretary Miguel Luz. I think you know Brother Andrew was once the Secretary of DEX. Okay, it was known as DEX before it became DepEd. He was actually the first Lasallian brother who had a national position as to the cabinet of the president. And so it was also during Brother Andrew's time where actually it is notable that research in the university was so much emphasized, to the point that all the faculty were required to actually undergo research. And that process actually elevated De La Salle University in what is now our very research-oriented university. Now, in the case of COSCA, our beginnings actually started sometime in the 80s when Pinatubo erupted. And our beginnings were simply on relief work. It was not even the same type of disaster response that we are right now, but at that time we were simply giving premium on really assisting the victims, or rather the survivors of the Pinatubo eruption. And so, of course, as time goes by, the center also evolved to eventually what we have right now. And right now, we are not simply focused on disaster relief. We are also into community development in general, which is, of course, something sustainable rather than the very short-term oriented disaster response and very erratic type of response. So we are more focused now in sustained efforts, and that is why I belong also to a program which is named the Lasallian Sustainable Development Program, which is also, of course, anchored on the Sustainable Development Goals. COSCA also has involvements among our external partners. So before students are deployed for their NSTP or service learning or for whatever, like outreach activities, the Center for Social Concern and Action actually prepares and even guides our external partner organizations, NGOs and people's organizations, and even church networks, so that they can be ready for engagements with students and faculty and the rest of the Lasallian community. We are also into volunteering, both students and the staff, the academic staff and support staff. And of course, we are into advocacy work. And in general, you will see why we are doing advocacy work. Because again, we cannot simply go into short-term oriented outreach activities, but sustain these efforts by promoting advocacies. So that's COSCA in a nutshell. I'll proceed with our discussion. And I would like to highlight a particular framework named Lasallian Reflection Framework. The Lasallian Reflection Framework is a very basic framework, even more basic than my discussion today on social engagement. It's basic because it's not something that De La Salle University only believes, but it's actually something every Lasallian should adhere to. And this is a way of putting us on how we see realities, on how we reflect on realities, and eventually respond to realities. Now, a prior framework, or rather an adapted framework, is on this is what we call the C-Judge Act. If you are familiar with or involved in church activities, there's a framework which is being used by the church, and it's basically see, judge, and act. So before you act on it, there's supposed to be a judging process, okay? And before you judge on it, there's supposed to be a seeing process. So it's, in a way, a simplified version of saying, I see realities, and when I see these realities, I try to reflect on these realities, and based on my reflection, I act on what can be acted upon on these realities. Now, there's a Lasallian twist to it, and there's, or rather, a Lasallian flavor to it, and this is what we call the Lasallian Reflection Framework. Now, rather than simply seeing it, the Lasallian way is also about experiencing it, and that is why it's masid danas, seeing, experiencing. It's not enough that you see, because when you simply see, it sounds like you're simply observing things. You are partial, you are tentative, you are passive to seeing things. So it can mean that There is no engagement in the process. But when you experience it, it's a different thing. Okay, and that is why there are immersions among our students and faculty and staff, because it's not enough that you see a particular reality, but when you experience that particular reality, it completes to a certain sense your seeing, your process of really knowing how it is to be there. It's easy to say, or rather, it's easy to see realities of our informal settlers, but it's a different thing when you live with them. Okay, easily when we see them, we are clouded with our judgments because we have conditions. We have already our prejudice born out of many stories that we hear, born out of many sharings that we perhaps hear from other people, or perhaps from our experiences as well. But it's a different thing when we are experiencing the very fact that we want to know more. So, in other words, it's easy to understand what hunger is if, in the first place, you experience hunger for yourself rather than seeing a beggar begging for food and you simply judge them as hunger or hungry. So, in the Lasallian reflection framework, it's not enough that we see. It's very important that we also experience realities. And then, of course, when we have that, then we can go by having our analysis, okay? That's actually the judging, which I mentioned a while ago. It's very cognitive. Now, there's nothing wrong with analyzing in, the very cognitive part, but in the Lasallian way, there's also reflection. There is, okay, like experiencing in the Masidanas, there's also nilay, pagninilay, reflection. Well, how is it if, for example, if your analysis goes this way, your reflection will be like, what if Jesus were to be here? What will he do given all these realities? Now that I know this, is it enough that I simply analyze things? Is it enough that I only show demographics? So, rather than it being cognitive, it becomes something also with a certain degree of emotion, with a certain degree of empathy, okay, rather than simply putting this and that, showing statistics, demographics, and all these very different tools in analysis. Now, the third part of this framework is taya kilos, okay? It's a very good thing when you put it in Tagalog. In English, it's commitment action. In the prior framework, it's simply action. But in the case of our Lasallian reflection framework, there is a commitment first before you can even act. Okay, why is this emphasized? Because when the going gets tough, we can actually not commit. When after our analysis reflection, we have said, oh, I cannot bear the thought of having or living with informal settlers, then perhaps you may not want to commit after seeing the poverty that you have. And that is why it's important to commit from the very start. Because, sometimes we are simply moved by sympathy and we want to do action immediately. But when we see that there's a need to sustain it, that is where commitment is already questioned. Because, perhaps you see that you cannot sustain a particular endeavor. But when you commit, however the risk, however the challenges, you will want to continue your actions. You will want to diversify your actions. You will want to plot out and plan out your actions so that you can sustain efforts. And that is why this is very crucial framework, because it reflects how a Lasallian is being formed. Okay, we are not simply formed to become board top-notchers. We are not simply formed to become number one in research, many citations for our research work, but we are also formed to commit to do something for society. And commitment is a very important aspect in this whole process and framework. Now, you see in the framework itself, it can actually revert back to Masidana's experience, because it's possible that whatever action that we have can actually be another opportunity for seeing and experiencing. So for example, your first action or commitment action is simply to give relief goods, and you realize that this giving of relief goods is not something sustainable, then you go back to the process of seeing and experiencing and analysis and reflection, and you proceed with a more sustainable commitment action. So it's actually a cycle, because somewhere along the way, we can actually find some things which can deepen our commitment action, which can deepen our involvement for society. So again, this is very important that we started with this reflection, because as we proceed with the discussion on social engagement framework, we will realize that there are actually different forms of doing social engagement, but the different forms of social engagement are nothing if we are not grounded with our Lasallian reflection framework. Okay, basically I already mentioned this a while ago, the Seeing, Judge, Act. There are gaps in between, but in the case of our LRF, it's actually intersected to each other. There is interconnection, there is synergy in that sense, because whatever we reflect will or whatever we will want to do has something to do with our experiences, has something to do with our analysis, reflection. I proceed with this. These are just examples of Masidanas. Okay, to fulfill Masidanas, we can actually go into exposures, immersion. Emphatic listening is also a way of Masidanas if it's impossible to physically do an immersion. Connections and relationships, okay, stories for that matter, and of course pure experience. Now when you own your very experience of doing things, doing realities, these are also these are as well possibilities for Masidanas. Then we have Suri Nilay. Okay, of course, we can go into different tools of analysis. We can have critical reflections, and we can have basis of truth claims. Okay, there are different literatures on that which we can use. Okay, and then Tayakilos. This would be the essentials for Tayakilos, and I like to highlight solidarity and subsidiarity as very important in this whole process. We are not simply doing things for the sake of doing things, or we are doing things because we are moved to do things. But of course, our doing things is also a participation of a bigger movement of doing things, and that is why there are what we call networks, coalitions, federations, and basically these groups are into collaboration for promotion of solidarities, promotion of advocacies. Okay, let us proceed. Okay. Now, this framework that we were discussing actually can contribute to the very vision mission of the university. Okay, the very vision mission of the university. And I'd like to highlight that our very vision mission is very much biased. Okay, not only with academic excellence, not only that we want to be a research, a premier research center or institute, that actually that we can do something for the marginalized and the vulnerable sectors of our society. And that is very clear in our vision mission. So I hope everyone is particular with is rather aware with our vision mission, because it will tell you the very ground where De La Salle University stands. That that after all, De La Salle University is not simply about academic excellence, or that we want everyone to be very good in research. That actually, all of these two pillars should lead into social engagement. And in particular, it attempts to do something with vulnerable and marginalized sectors of our society. Now, what is the university social engagement? Now, the university has adopted a definition for this from Washington Center of 2015. And if you read the definition, you will see, or rather you will read, that our social engagement is not simply the short-term or type of social engagements, although there are short-term oriented engagements. From the definition itself, you will see that the university wants to address public good, meaning to say that it does not want to simply act on its own, but also wants to participate in the public engagement and discussions. It also wants systemic challenges, address systemic challenges. So therefore, it also wants to involve, collaborate with the many people who are doing some systemic efforts. Okay, for example, the case of COVID-19. Okay, this is a very complex and complicated problem, and this cannot just simply be resolved by sending police and military personnel. This cannot simply be resolved by a particular group of persons managing things, but you have to collaborate with different sectors, and in particular, you have to collaborate with the frontliners, medical practitioners, because after all, the COVID-19 is first and foremost a medical concern, and of course, you also want to see how it impacts in our society. And that is why you have to collaborate with different sectors in society, because you cannot just see this as if the solution is to, send police, instill discipline, tell people to wear masks, etc., etc. It's not enough. Okay, you have to see different aspects, and that is why it's systemic. And in this case, the university wants to also engage in that type of engagement. And then, of course, it also attempts to influence the direction of a community. So it wants to involve into the lives of our communities, so much so that we influence them to think, okay, to according to a particular paradigm that should be life-giving. Okay, so all our efforts are towards life-giving efforts, and this way of addressing it is by way of influencing them to go this way. And that is why when we, for example, release statements, that's a way of influencing the direction of a community rather than the community simply bowing to a particular paradigm. If the university can speak out on certain issues, that it intends to influence the direction of a community. We proceed with the next. So there are different types of social engagement, and I would like to highlight first socially engaged research. Now, this is not your typical research, of course, where you simply, really gather data and the output is eventually something that you can be proud of for all your citations, that you have produced a book, etc., etc. But hopefully that this research can build greater awareness on different discussions in our society. Okay, it can be something on poverty, it can be something educational, it can be something on the environment, etc., etc. So with this type of research, we can greatly contribute, we can greatly influence people in different sectors of our society. If our research can actually do something, as I mentioned in the earlier stage of our discussion, if our research can really do something, can really help a particular issue in our society, then that is a socially engaged research. If you can, if your research has led to diminishing or that actually you can minimize pollution, for example, then that is a socially engaged research. If your research can actually help out in the issue of hunger, then that is also socially engaged research. Okay. The other type of, or rather form of social engagement will be service learning. Service learning here is actually an academic requirement, but it's not simply just like any academic requirement, because other than you learning, okay, you're supposed to apply it, and that's the service aspect of it. You're supposed to apply what you have learned in class. So for example, if you are an engineering student, whatever you have learned in your class can actually be applied in a particular barangay. Okay, say for example, the barangay needs people who can do something with their solid waste management issues, or they want to do something with their solar technology, or they want something to do with their sewage system, or if they want to build, for example, child-friendly spaces. Okay, so if what you learn in class can actually translate into something, then that is service learning. Okay. The other form will be interdisciplinary fora, which highlights synergy from different sectors. So it's not just a simple forum that we all know or we are used to, but this highlights our attempt really to see different voices from different perspectives, from different disciplines, so that we can come up with a synergy as to how to approach societal problems. So for example, if your problem has something to do with the environment, we cannot just simply rely on what the government has to say. You need to invite environmental scientists. You need to invite, for example, the wisdom and the knowledge of our indigenous peoples. You need to invite church people as well. And with all of these different sectors represented, I think we can see a very enriched discussion on how to seek solutions on societal problems like poverty, in the environment, issues of the youth, etc., etc. So this is now the trust of the university, that there will be different sectors when we have our fora. The other thing will be issue awareness and advocacy. So I think you are very much aware that the university is active on this. We actually have a committee on national issues and concern, or CONIC, which addresses the many national issues that we have. And in particular today, De La Salle Philippines, the mother entity of all the Lasallian universities and colleges and schools, actually has um, has put us in a perspective where we are engaging our government right now on the issue of the state of the nation, and that is why what we have, if you're aware, we have a while ago sa what we call so nagkaisa, okay? So nagkaisa. So it's sona at nagkaisa. So it's so nagkaisa. And this is our proactive response in dealing with the national issues that we have right now, in also attempting to see, okay, participate from other like-minded individuals, institutions, organizations on the issues of our country today. Public engagement is another form of social engagement, and many of our university faculty members are very much involved in this type of form of engagement. Many of them are called to share their expertise and technical assistance to the government. Once in a while, they go to the Senate to become luminaries on this and that. They are called to Congress to be resource persons on a particular bill. They are called to help in local government units to become consultants on particular engagements or projects. I can readily mention several professors here who are actually involved with, for example, NEDA, who are involved in DPWH or DNR, and many other government institutions. And not only that, they are also involved in different civil society organizations or even faith-based organizations, and where their expertise and technical assistance are geared towards addressing poverty, education, good governance, and even environmental sustainability. So yeah, this is another form of social engagement, public engagement. Perhaps some of you here are involved in your barangays. If you are involved in your barangays as a consultant or resource person or whatever, then that's a form of public engagement, because you did not restrict yourself from simply doing academic work in the university, but you actually went beyond what is expected of you, and there's an extra mile in this whole process because you shared yourself as on the basis of your expertise to entities in our society. And of course, the last type of social engagement, according to the university, will be, of course, the direct services type of social engagement, where many of us, I think, have or rather experiences already in the past or ongoing. Your, for example, visit to Gawad Kalinga, where you constructed a house, or that can also be Habitat for Humanity, or your donation of blood through Red Cross is actually a direct service as well. Your coastal cleanup, okay, your planting of trees, etc., etc. These are forms of direct services to the poor. Okay, if you were involved during this whole process where we have COVID-19 and eventually still doing frontline work, then that's a direct service to the poor and marginalized. Okay. Now, I like to highlight this particular slide because this is where the university wants to emphasize our engagements, that hopefully all our engagements should be sustained. But at the same time, eventually will become developmental. So it's not enough that year in, year out, you will be giving relief goods, but hopefully that particular giving of relief goods for this year can perhaps develop next year, because in the process, you have experience, nagkaroon po kayo ng masid danas, and you went through a certain analysis and reflection and realized that this cannot continue, that you simply gave relief goods, because otherwise you will be building a relationship of dole outs. So you developed in this whole process, and ask from people that perhaps there are other things that you can be of help, that your organization can actually help. And so during perhaps your interview and interaction with them, you realize that education is also another opportunity for this partnership. And so from the initial giving of goods, it has transformed into interaction, or rather engagement towards doing something on education, because perhaps that particular organization or community lacks or rather lags behind in terms of accessibility of education, or there are many out of school youth, or resources are not enough, and so you want to do something with filling in those issues on education. So again, the university wants to emphasize that all our efforts should be sustained, and hopefully we become also development, so that in this way we can really empower our partners. Okay, that's the word, empower. That our efforts will not become something, or will not lead to dependency, will not lead to dole outs, but hopefully as well, when we sustain, we can eventually develop together with our partners, and after some time realize for them that they have become sustainable, they have become empowered, that you can also move on from this group and maybe develop another partner, another organization where you see or feel that there's a need for help. Okay. With that, I actually finished my discussion, and let us proceed with the next part, where I'll attempt to make this tangible for all of us.